Okay, here we are. So, welcome to episode 4 of these little videos that I'm doing. I'm going to go through a couple of questions today, again based around the working memory model, and there's a bit of research methods linked in. So, if we have a look at the first question, the question is, apart from the central executive, name and briefly outline two other components of the working memory model. So the first thing you want to do is break down the question, just like we've said before, and identify obviously the command words here and obviously the marks. Always start by doing that so you know exactly what it's saying. This is then the next step that I would take. The signed think, is this AO1, AO2 or AO3? So we are dealing with an AO1 question, testing our knowledge. There's no scenario for this particular question, and there's no evaluation asking for strengths, weaknesses, etc. Now, what you may want to start to do is now pause the video and brainstorm yourself to think about what other components are there, and then label them off here. And you've got to always think as well, one of the biggest mistakes is getting the wrong model. So we are dealing with the working memory model, thus the model with the central executive as its main key component. Okay, so it does say apart from the central executive, so we need to be thinking of two other parts to it. So as the question is split into name and outline, you will get 2 marks for simply naming two other components. So as I said before, if you have a go at breaking down the question, I will just pause for a second and allow you to do that. Okay, so hopefully you have paused and you've written around the question. So you could do a variety of things here. There's 3 components or other components to this model. So we have the visuospatial sketchpad. That is the visuospatial sketchpad. So there's 1 mark straight away. We will come to the outlining bit in a second. We also have the phonological loop and the episodic buffer. So you would pick 2 of them, whichever ones you'd want. So let's say we pick this one and this one for argument's sake, but that will get you 2 marks. So how do you get the other marks? Well, you need to outline those things. So if you haven't done already and you've waited for the answers there, do pause the video and attempt to describe those to the best of your ability. So there's a range of things that you could say here. So visuospatial sketchpad, you could be talking about how it temporarily stores visual and spatial information. You could say it has limited capacity. You could be talking about the fact that it codes visually. Lots and lots of information. How much you need to include though is not lots, because remember you've got 1 mark already for this by just naming it, so you don't need lots and lots of information. In terms of the phonological loop, you could say potentially that it is subdivided, so split further into the articulatory loop and the phonological store. So you could talk about it being subdivided. You could talk about its coding, or again the fact that it has limited capacity, but you do want to make it sound quite different to the one above. If you did choose to talk about the episodic buffer, you would say something along the lines of the fact it collects and combines information from the other components and then transfers that memory or into the long-term memory. So the MARC scheme, when you see it, which I will make reference to in a second, is going to let you talk about other components that are kind of subdivided. So if you did talk about the articulatory loop, technically that is a component of it. However, I would suggest these three being the main components. Okay, so as promised, I will now show you the MARC scheme. So as you can see, as I said to you before, you get 1 mark for naming the component, 1 mark for a brief outline of the component. It could be a great idea at this moment just to pause the video on the MARC scheme and then make any more adjustments that you deem necessary. Okay, so we move down to our next question, now a second, which talked about a difference between the working memory and the multi-store model. So here it is. So the question says, suggest one way in which the working memory model might be a better explanation of short-term memory than the multi-store model. So again, with this one, do take your time to break down the question. Obviously, the big thing here is it's suggesting one way in which the working memory might be better, so you don't need any more than that. The MARC scheme for this one, when you see it in a second, is quite to the point. There is a variety of things that you could say. However, if I was answering this question, I would go down the route of either the fact that it's more of an active processor, so there's a lot more going on with that, or I would say that it is not a single unitary store. So then maybe just say, so that provides a more detailed view of what's going on in the short-term memory. Okay. Obviously with that question as well, when you see the MARC scheme, look at the other options, and if any of them seem better to you, then use them. However, as I said, the purpose of these videos are to go through what I would do, as in I am doing it from my point of view, but there are obviously alternate ways to do this. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at that one, and now here is the MARC scheme, so you can see it. So there it is. As it says there 1 mark for a brief suggestion of why the working memory model offers a better explanation. Possible content, it's not a unitary store. There's the one I said as well at the bottom there, the working memory model explains short term as a more active process than multi-store, so there's a lot more going on than what the multi-store model predicts. The fact that it's maybe a more detailed version rather than a simplistic idea that is just one single unitary store. Okay, it is only 1 mark, and as it says there, a brief suggestion, so you don't need to go into lots and lots of detail. Okay, so here we go then. So this is our final question. It's kicking in here, and this is where the research methods element comes in. So they will try and do this, and they will mix in research methods alongside actual kind of memory or social influence or attachment or whichever topic you're doing. So in this case, we have this question. So it says a researcher investigated the working memory model using a lab experiment. 40 students from a local college volunteered to take part. In condition A, 20 students performed the following 2 tasks at the same time. So they mentally were counting backwards from 100 and they were tracking coloured shapes on a computer screen. In condition B, 20 different students performed the following two tasks at the same time. So they were mentally counting back from 100 and then reading a poem out loud. And it says there, the researcher predicted that the performance of students in condition A will be better than the performance of students in condition B. So the first thing I would say here is research methods in particular. You always want to just keep reading back through that scenario and deconstructing literally absolutely everything. So the wording of this is key. So the fact that it's a lab experiment, I mean, you again might want to pause the video and do this yourself and just jot down. Obviously, if you don't have this question in front of you, you can see the scenario, maybe just bullet point down key bits about the scenario. Okay, so the fact it is a lab experiment denotes high reliability, maybe more control over extraneous variables, but obviously there's that lack of generalizability. Is it true to real life? Probably not. Does it lack mundane realism? Is it a fake task, etc.? All of that should be coming out. Okay, you have 40 students, a relatively small sample size, and obviously they are volunteers from a local college, so that sample is very, very limited and may suffer from lack of population validity or sample bias. Okay, so in terms of this, we can also work out that the students are performing in one of the conditions. So this is an independent groups design. So the fact they're only taking part, and obviously it says 20 different students. It doesn't say anything about them coming back to do the other condition. So we're dealing with an independent groups design. You might want to think at that point, is there any weaknesses that come to mind with that? The fact that they're using different participants in each conditions. All of this stuff, as I said, should be written down. Okay, so first question is kind of inbound here with this bit. And the first one says as follows. So it says, name the two components of the working memory that will be involved in the performance of the task in condition A. So you need to be now thinking, what do I do here in terms of the components? Do I remember the components? Hopefully you do, because we've just done that on a previous question. But yeah, this is where you need to be thinking, what can I write around the question? Okay, so once you've had a think and maybe pause the question, obviously the components from before, we have the episodic buffer, we have the phonological loop, we have sections, subsections within that, we have our central executive, we have the visuospatial sketchpad. So in terms of completing these questions, again, you might want to pause, you might want to have a go now, and then we'll go through. So the answer here to A would be the either the articulatory loop or the phonological loop. Either of them would be accepted. So this is a task that involves mentally counting backwards. So that will be that one. And then tracking the coloured shapes, again, will be the visuospatial sketchpad. Obviously you'd write it in full, and that would be 2 marks. Now, the most interesting thing here is the next question. So as I said before, this is where research methods will come in, and you can kind of see the question there. I will just move it up a second. There we are. So here it is. So it says, briefly explain 2 ways in which the working memory experiment described above could be improved. And this is a 4-mark question. Okay, so this is 4 marks. Down there, because you can't see it at the bottom there. So in terms of this is why and this is when I would go back to your breakdown, all the bullet points that you made about the study, what was good and what different things mean, and is it in independent groups? Yes, it was. What was the sample size, etc. And there are there's a variety of things you could do at this point. obviously there is no right or wrong answer. You will get 2 marks per suggestion, but they do have to be clear and coherent. If they're muddled or not explained, you'd be obviously looking at 1. And if you simply just name a thing to do, so you could just put change the design or change the design to repeated measures, you're not going to get anything. So if you simply state what's going to happen, you're not going to get anything. So anything about improvement of a study, this is a research methods question that keeps coming up. It's something they absolutely love. How do you improve the validity of this? How do you improve the study? How do you improve this, that, and the other? This is obviously, well, not obviously, but this is an AO3 style question. And you do need to remember that it is saying to do 2. So there's a variety of things here. I mean, I'm going to try and keep things simple. So I would change the fact that it's a lab. So I would maybe suggest doing a more realistic setting and a more realistic task. Now that will in turn improve, and you always want to link back to this word improve, the external validity and the generalizability to real life. That's one thing you could improve. And then I would potentially go down the route of changing the design. So change design, and then, so that is the experimental design, sorry. So from an independent groups, so from one of them to either, sorry, I've just realized that's gone off the page. So here, so change experimental design from an independent groups potentially to a repeated measures, but you have to say why. You have to say why it will improve, what it will improve. So you could say, you know, an independent group's design may suffer from individual differences or participant variables. By keeping the same participants in both conditions, this should reduce this and improve the internal validity. When you see in the mark scheme in a bit, it makes reference to things like improving the sample, maybe changing the nature of the task, and you will see that now in a second. Okay, so here it is. So here is the first couple of marks where it said 1 mark for each in terms of naming the components. And I'll just pause there a sec, or you could pause there on this part of the screen to get down your answers. And finally, there is your last question. So this is the one in terms of improvements. Okay, this is, it says possible improvements, credit other valid improvements, so you could do other things, but there is a variety of things that you could use there. What I would say is make sure you link to that word improvement, make it relevant as well to the study, so try and link in there as well and be clear and explain why it's going to improve it, and yeah, how it would improve. And as I said before, they do really like this type of question, so do be cautious and answer it in a nice, clear and coherent way, as it says up there on the top. Okay, so that concludes this set of videos on the working memory model and a little bit of research methods there. If there's anything else in particular that you want to be covered, then do let me know in the comments. And don't forget, if you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel, as I will keep sending these through, and then obviously you'll get notified by clicking the little bell icon on there. So I hope that helps. I've shared the mark schemes as well, as it was requested by a few people. So yeah, so there we are. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time.